The sun clawed at the earth, searing the plains until the air shimmered with heat. Dust coated her boots, her skirts, her cracked lips, each step grinding grit between her teeth. Eliza stood alone on the ridge, the widow's ranch sprawling below, like a promise broken. Her hands trembled, clutching the reins of a stallion that snorted and pawed the ground, its black eyes wild with defiance. 30 men had tried to tame it. 30 men had failed, spat back into the dirt, bruised or bleeding. She'd watched them all, her heart a stone in her chest, her wealth a weight she couldn't shake. The wind hissed, carrying the scent of sage and failure. She was alone again, as she'd been since the fever took her husband, since the letters stopped coming, since the world turned its back. Her fingers tightened on the reins, the leather biting into her palms. The stallion reared hooves, slicing the air, and she stumbled back, her breath catching like a sob. She didn't cry, not anymore. Tears were for women who still believed in mercy. The ranch hands lingered at the fence, their hats tipped low, muttering bets on how long she'd last before she sold the land and fled. She could feel their eyes, sharp as thorns, but she didn't turn. She'd built this place with her own hands, her own grief, and she'd be damned if she let it crumble. The stallion bucked again, a scream tearing from its throat, and she fell hard, her knees slamming into the dirt. Pain flared, bright and hot, but she didn't move. The sky above was endless, indifferent, a blue so deep it hurt to look at. She thought of her husband's hands, calloused and sure, guiding this same horse before it turned wild, before he turned cold, before she learned how silence could cut deeper than any knife. She pushed herself up, dust clinging to her face like a second skin, and faced the beast again. It snorted head low, watching her with something like respect or maybe just hunger. A shadow moved at the edge of her vision. A man, lean and weathered, stood by the corral, his hat pulled low, his coat patched at the elbows. He didn't speak, didn't offer help, just watched, his hands loose at his sides, as if the world's weight didn't touch him. She didn't know him, didn't want to. Strangers brought trouble, and she'd had enough of that. But his eyes, gray as storm clouds, held hers for a moment too long, and something stirred in her chest, sharp and unfamiliar. Not hope, not yet, just the ghost of it. She turned back to the stallion, her breath uneven. The hands at the fence were quiet now, the air thick with waiting. She stepped forward, one hand outstretched, her voice low and steady despite the ache in her bones. Easy, now, she whispered, more to herself than the horse. It snorted, ears twitching, but didn't charge. Her heart pounded, a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. The stranger's gaze burned into her back, but she didn't look, not yet. The sun sank lower, painting the plains gold and blood-red. Shadows stretched long like fingers reaching for something lost. She thought of the nights she'd sat alone in the big house, the fire dying, the wind howling through the cracks. She'd written letters to no one, burned them before dawn. She'd buried dreams in that dirt, alongside her husband. But here now, with the stallion's breath hot against her palm, she felt something shift, a crack in the stone of her heart. The stranger moved closer, silent as a shadow. He didn't speak, but his presence was a weight, a question she wasn't ready to answer. She didn't need saving. She didn't need anything. But the stallion's eyes softened, just for a moment, and she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about mercy. Asterisk, asterisk. The stallion's breath clouded in the cooling air, its flanks heaving as Eliza held her ground. Her hand hovered near its muzzle, steady despite the tremble in her bones. The ranch hands had drifted away, their murmurs swallowed by the dusk. Only the stranger remained, leaning against the corral post, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. She didn't look at him, but she felt his gaze, heavy as the earth beneath her feet. The plains stretched endless around them, the horizon bruised purple, the wind carrying a faint tang of rain that wouldn't come. Her mind drifted, unbidden, to the winter before last. She saw her husband's face, pale and slick with sweat, his voice a rasp as he spoke of the stallion, his pride, his fire. He'll carry you through, he'd said, his hand weak in hers. But he was gone by morning, and the horse turned feral, as if it knew the world had cracked. She'd stood over his grave, the wind tearing at her shawl, and promised she'd keep the ranch alive, not for him, but for the part of her that still believed in stubborn things. The stranger coughed, a dry sound that pulled her back. She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing. His face was lined, not old but worn, like leather left too long in the sun. He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture so small it barely counted, and stepped into the corral. The stallion snorted, ears pinning back. But the man moved slow, his boots silent in the dust. He didn't look at her, just at the horse, his hands open, palms up, like he was asking permission. "Who are you?" she said, her voice rough, the first words she'd spoken in hours. He didn't answer right away, just kept his eyes on the stallion, circling wide, his steps deliberate. The horse pawed the ground, but its head lowered, just a fraction. "Name's Cal," he said finally, his voice low like gravel underfoot. "Heard you got a horse needs breaking." 30 men tried, she said, her tone sharp. "What makes you different?" He shrugged, his eyes still on the stallion. "Don't aim to break him, aim to listen," she scoffed. But something in his words caught, like a splinter under skin. She watched as he moved closer to the horse, not rushing, not forcing. His hands stayed low, his voice a murmur too soft to hear. The stallion's ears flicked, and for the first time in months, it didn't rear. Eliza's chest tightened, a mix of anger and something she couldn't name. She didn't trust him, didn't trust anyone, but the way the horse stilled, the way its breath slowed, felt like a betrayal of her own failure. She remembered the letters she'd written after her husband died, pages of grief she'd never sent. She'd poured out her heart to a sister who'd stopped writing back, to a mother long dead. The words had been her only company, until she burned them, watching the ash rise like ghosts. She'd thought she could outrun the ache, build a wall of work and wealth, but the stallion had undone her. Every failure in that corral was a mirror, showing her the cracks she couldn't hide. Cal stepped back, the stallion watching him, wary but calm. He turned to her, his gray eyes catching the last light. "He's not fighting you," he said. "He's fighting what he lost." Her throat burned. She wanted to snap at him, to tell him he knew nothing of loss, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned away, her hands clenching into fists. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. She thought of the empty house waiting for her, the cold hearth, the silence that pressed against her skin. She didn't want this stranger's help, didn't want his quiet knowing, but the stallion stood still, and for the first time she wondered if she could. Too. The stars were beginning to prick the sky, sharp and cold. Cal leaned against the fence, his face half-shadowed, waiting for something she wasn't ready to give. She took a step toward the horse, her hand outstretched again, and felt the weight of the night settle around her, heavy and alive. The corral was a circle of silence now. The stallion's breath the only sound, steady and slow. Eliza's hand lingered near its muzzle, her fingers brushing the coarse hair, warm and alive. The horse didn't pull away. She felt the weight of that moment, fragile as glass, and her chest ached with something she hadn't let herself feel. Since the fever took everything, the stars above burned brighter, their light cold and unyielding, like the plains that stretched beyond the ranch, vast and unforgiving. Cal stood by the fence, his shadow long and still, his eyes on her now, not the horse. She didn't meet his gaze, not yet. Her mind slipped again, back to the spring when the first men came. Big men, loud men, with ropes and spurs and boasts that soured in the dust. They'd lashed at the stallion, cursed its fire, left with broken bones or broken pride. She'd watched from the porch, her hands folded tight, her face a mask, each failure carved deeper into her, a reminder of her own helplessness. She'd built the ranch to prove she could stand alone, but the stallion was a mirror, reflecting the truth. She was still the girl left behind, waiting for a letter that never came, a promise that turned to ash. Cal moved his boots soft in the dirt, and the stallion's ears flicked but didn't pin. He stopped a few paces away, close enough for her to smell the tobacco on his coat, the faint sweat of a man who'd walked long roads. "He trusts you," he said, his voice low, not demanding more than you think. She wanted to snap that she didn't need his words, didn't need him seeing her like this raw, exposed, her hands shaking as they touched the horse. But the stallion leaned into her palm just a fraction, and her throat closed around the retort. She remembered the nights she'd walked the ranch alone, the wind her only companion, whispering through the sagebrush. She'd screamed into it once, after the last letter burned, her voice swallowed by the vastness. No one heard. Number one came, but now, this stranger stood here, seeing too much, saying too little. "Trust ain't enough," she said finally, her voice rough as the cracked earth. "He's wild, always will be." Cal tilted his head, his eyes catching the starlight. "Wild ain't the same as broken. You don't tame a thing like that. You meet it where it stands." Her lips pressed thin. She wanted to hate him, wanted to send him away with the others, but the stallion's warmth under her hand felt like a pulse, steady and alive, and she couldn't deny the shift in the air. The ranch hands were gone, the corral empty save for the three of them, her Cal, the horse. The night pressed close, the wind carrying a chill that made her shiver. She thought of her husband's grave, the dirt still soft under her boots, and the promise she'd made to keep this place alive, not for him, but for her, for the part of her that refused to break. Cal stepped closer, slow, like he was approaching the stallion again. He didn't touch her, didn't offer help, but his presence was a weight, steady and unyielding. "You've been fighting him alone," he said. "Don't have to." Her eyes stung and she turned away, her hand still on the stallion's muzzle. The horse snorted softly, its breath warm against her skin. She saw herself in its eyes, wild, wounded, but still standing. The stars overhead were a map of all she'd lost, but also of something new, something she couldn't name. She didn't trust it, didn't trust him, but for the first time in years, she felt the ground beneath her shift, like a river changing course. The night deepened, the air sharp with the scent of dust and coming rain. Cal waited, silent, his hands loose at his sides. She didn't look at him, but she felt the question in his stillness, the same question she'd asked herself every night since the fever. Could she let go? Could she let someone meet her where she stood? ***, the night air bit at Eliza's knuckles, roar from the reins as she stood by the stallion. Its eyes gleamed under the starlight, holding her reflection worn, unyielding, alive. The corral felt smaller now, the world reduced to the space between her, the horse, and Cal's quiet presence. The wind carried a low moan, stirring the dust at her feet, and she felt the weight of years pressing down, years of holding the ranch together, of burying grief in work, of waking to silence. Her hand rested on the stallion's neck, its pulse steady under her palm, and for a moment she could almost believe in something softer than survival. She remembered the summer her husband brought the stallion home, a colt then, all legs and fire. They'd laughed under the wide sky, his hand warm in hers, the future bright as the noon sun. But the fever came like a thief, stealing his breath, his promises, leaving her with a ranch too big and a heart too heavy. She'd fought for both, clawing against the land's indifference, the hand's doubts, her own breaking spirit. The stallion had been her husband's dream, and she'd clung to it, as if taming it could bring back what was gone. Cal shifted his boots, scuffing softly, and the stallion's ears twitched but didn't flare. He was closer now, near enough that she could see the lines etched around his eyes, the kind carved by sun and sorrow. He didn't speak, just watched the horse, then her, his gaze steady, not prying. She hated how it made her feel seen, not judged. She'd spent so long armoring herself against pity, against help, that his quiet felt like a challenge, or maybe an invitation. "You don't know me," she said, her voice low, sharp. "Don't know what I've carried." He nodded, slow, like he was weighing her words. "Don't need to know," he said. "I see you standing here. That's enough." Her breath caught, a jagged thing. She wanted to turn away, to walk back to the house and its familiar emptiness, but her feet wouldn't move. The stallion snorted, shifting closer, its warmth a anchor against the cold night. She thought of the letters she'd burned, the words she'd never spoken, the weight of being the widow who wouldn't break. Cal's words hung in the air, simple and heavy, like stones in a riverbed. She didn't trust them, but she felt them, stirring something she'd buried deep. He stepped toward the stallion, his hand slow, deliberate, brushing its flank. The horse didn't shy, just watched him, wary but still. "He's waiting for you to choose," Cal said, not looking at her. "To fight him or to let him run with you." She clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening on the reins. Choose, as if it were that simple. As if she hadn't chosen every day since the fever. Every dawn she dragged herself from bed. Every night she faced the dark alone. But the stallion's eyes held hers, and she saw something there, not defiance, not fear, but a question. The same one Cal's silence asked, the same one she'd avoided in the mirror. The wind rose, carrying the scent of sage and earth, and she felt the ranch around her, its fences, its fields, its stubborn heart. She'd built it to prove she could survive, but surviving wasn't living. The stallion shifted, its head lowering, and she felt the choice like a blade, hold on to the pain or risk something new. Cal stood there, not pushing, not pulling, just waiting, like the land itself, patient and unyielding. She loosened her grip on the reins, just a fraction, and the stallion stilled, its breath sinking with hers. The stars above were sharp, a map of loss and possibility. She didn't know if she could trust Cal, or the horse, or herself. But for the first time, she wanted to try. The corral was a world unto itself. The night pressing in, thick with the scent of dust and horse, and something sharper, hope, maybe, or fear. Eliza's hand rested on the stallion's neck, its warmth grounding her, though her heart raced like it was trying to outrun itself. The reins hung loose in her other hand, no longer a tether but a thread, fragile and taut. Cal stood a few paces off, his shadow blending with the fence, his silence louder than any words. The stars above burned fierce, a sky too vast for answers, and the wind whispered through the sage, carrying the weight of her choice. She thought of the mornings she'd woken to the ranch's demands, fences to mend, hands to pay, the endless grind of proving she belonged. She'd carried it all, her grief a shadow she never named. The stallion had been her mirror, its wildness her own, its refusal to bend a reflection of her stubborn heart. But now, with its breath steady under her touch, she felt the edges of that heart soften, like earth after rain. She didn't know if it was the horse or Cal or the night itself, but something had shifted and she couldn't unfeel it. Cal moved, slow, his hands still at his sides. He didn't approach the stallion this time, just her, stopping close enough that she could hear his breath, steady and unhurried. "You're carrying more than this horse," he said, his voice low, like it was meant only for her. "Ain't my place to say what, but you don't have to carry it alone." Her jaw tightened, and she turned her face away, the stallion's warmth anchoring her. She wanted to tell him to leave, to take his quiet knowing and go, but the words stuck. She saw her husband's grave again, the dirt soft under her boots, the wind tugging at her like it wanted her to fall. She'd stood there alone, promising to hold the ranch together, to hold herself together. But alone was a heavy word, and she was tired of its weight. The stallion shifted, its hoof scraping the dirt, and she felt the rhythm of its breath, steady, alive. She remembered the first time she'd ridden it, years ago, when it was still a colt, her husband's laughter echoing across the plains. She'd felt free then, like the wind itself, like nothing could break her. Now, with Cal's eyes on her and the horse's pulse under her hand, she wondered if freedom was something you could find again, or if it was just another thing you buried. Never asked for help, she said, her voice rough, barely above a whisper. Never needed it. Cal nodded, his eyes on the horizon now where the stars met the black edge of the earth. Didn't say you needed it, said you could have it. Her chest ached, a sharp sudden thing, like a crack in frozen ground. She looked at the stallion, its eyes dark and deep, and saw herself not the widow, not the rancher, but the woman who'd once laughed under a wide sky. She didn't know if she could be that woman again, didn't know if she trusted Cal or the fragile thing growing between them. But the stallion stood still, and for the first time she didn't feel like she was fighting it. The wind rose, cool and sharp, carrying the scent of rain that might never fall. She let the reins slip through her fingers, not dropping them, just giving them slack. The stallion didn't bolt, didn't rear, just stood there, watching her. Cal waited, his hands loose, his silence a space she could step into if she chose. And for the first time in years, she thought she might. Dawn broke slow, a thin line of gold splitting the horizon, spilling light across the plains like spilled whiskey. Eliza stood by the corral, the stallion's reins loose in her hand, her breath clouding in the chill. The horse was calm, its eyes half-lidded as if it had made its peace with the night. Cal was there, a few steps away, his coat dusted with frost, his hands tucked into his pockets. The ranch stretched around them, quiet except for the distant low of cattle, the air sharp with sage and the promise of a new day. She hadn't slept, hadn't gone back to the house. The corral felt safer, its boundaries clear, its purpose simple. She thought of the years she'd spent building walls around the ranch, around herself. The stallion had been her defiance, her refusal to let go of the past. But last night, with its breaths warm against her hand, she'd felt something give, like a knot untying. Cal hadn't pushed, hadn't spoken since she'd let the rein slip. His silence was a gift, one she didn't know how to accept. She glanced at him now, his face half-lit by the rising sun, and saw no judgment, only patience. It scared her more than the stallion's fire ever had. The horse snorted, shifting its weight, and she stepped closer, her hand finding its neck again. Its pulse was steady, a rhythm that matched the faint hope stirring in her chest. She remembered the last time she'd felt this close to something alive, her husband's hand in hers, his laugh carried on the wind. She'd buried that feeling with him, thinking it was gone for good. But the stallion's warmth, Cal's quiet, the dawn's light, they were pulling it back, piece by piece. I don't know how to do this, she said, her voice barely audible, the words spilling before she could stop them. She didn't look at Cal, kept her eyes on the horse, not the horse, the rest of it. He didn't answer right away, just shifted his weight, the crunch of his boots soft in the dirt. Don't reckon anyone does, he said finally. You just keep going, one step, then another. She wanted to laugh, to call it simple nonsense, but the truth of it stung. She'd been stepping forward since the fever, since the letters stopped, since the world turned cold. Each step had been a fight, a refusal to break. But now, with the stallion still under her touch, with Cal's steady presence, she wondered if stepping forward could mean something else. Not fighting, not surviving, but living. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and the stallion lifted its head, its ears pricking toward the plains. Eliza loosened her grip on the reins entirely, letting them fall to the ground. The horse didn't move, just stood there, its breath a soft cloud in the morning light. She felt Cal's eyes on her, but she didn't turn. Instead, she looked out at the ranch, the fences she'd mended, the fields she'd sown, the life she'd built from ash. It wasn't enough to just hold it together anymore. She wanted more. The wind stirred, gentle now, carrying the scent of earth and possibility. She took a step back from the stallion, her hands empty, her heart full. Cal stayed where he was, his shadow long across the corral, his silence a space she could fill. The stallion snorted, its hooves shifting, and she felt the ground beneath her, solid and sure. The sun rose higher, painting the plains gold, and she thought of the dust that had coated her boots, her hands, her heart. It was still there, but it didn't feel so heavy anymore.